I would open this video by saying that Severance was one of my favorite new shows in recent memory. But with nearly 3 years passing since it came out, I'm not sure new is the right way to describe it. Boy, was season 1 a lot of fun though. Part of that was that it came out of nowhere. And at least at first, no one was really watching it. So for those of us who were, it felt like we stumbled in on the ground floor of something that was quietly setting itself up to be one of the best things on TV. A lot of the discussion around the show for the past few years is related chiefly to its mysteries, which is something it aims to get people to do. But for me, what works best is the nature of the innie characters. That's the secret ingredient as far as I'm concerned. So that's what I'll be focusing on in this recap of sorts. It's been a long time, and even if you're like me and was really invested in paying attention at the time, you've still probably forgotten a lot of what happened in that first season. The premise the show is built on is, what if you could separate your work and home lives for real? What if there was a procedure that would make it so when you went to work, you shut off the part of your brain that you use when you're not there and became a whole different person? Or another version of yourself maybe is more accurate, since it's the same body more or less functioning in the same way. The key difference is your life experiences, and generally speaking, the things that make you the you are missing in the one who goes to work. The innies are fully formed adults who can still access parts of the outies' memories. As a YouTube TV recapper, I have zero background in science related to memories, but I have been following the discussion on how this works and have spent a fair amount of time researching it. Long-term memory in humans is divided into 2 categories: implicit and explicit memory. Implicit memory is used unconsciously and is important for innies because it allows them to perform tasks without being consciously aware of previous experiences. Think of something like taking a drink of water. If you're thirsty and someone hands you one, you just drink it without thinking. And the first time you did that, or any memory of learning to do it, is inconsequential. Things like this are a part of your procedural memory, and having access to that allows the innies to do everything they need to do at work. Explicit memory can also be broken down into 2 categories: semantic memories, which are factual information you learn, and then the most important one for innies because they can't access it, episodic memories, which are your specific personal experiences. If you think back to Helly's initial survey when she wakes up on the table on the severed floor, the only question she can answer is the third one. When asked to name any US state or territory, she can fire off Delaware because the names of states are factual information she likely committed to memory as a child. The test is a clever way to introduce the split. If she knew the answers to the other 4 questions or couldn't answer number 3, the higher-ups would know that the chip wasn't working right. The opening scene works well to keep us almost as disoriented as Helly is. Since everyone else on the floor is already severed, she serves as the audience surrogate while we cluelessly watch her onboarding process. It makes sense that Severance removes the sharing of episodic memories. The lack of shared experiences creates a clean break between innie and outie, which is reflected visually in the break in the letter R from the Season 1 logo. Not having to deal with work or anything their counterpart experiences there makes the process attractive for the outie. And it also creates this fantastic situation for a TV show where you have a bunch of adults who essentially have the minds of children running around trying to figure out who they are. There's an innocence built into it that gives the writers so many possibilities to work with. Who would you be right now if another version of you were introduced with all your experiences stripped away? It's one of the many philosophical questions the procedure opens the door to. And it's not surprising that the show opens with the question, who are you? Because in a nutshell, that's the question the series explores. I mentioned the premise. What if you could surgically induce a work-life balance? This idea works as a hook because we all have to work to live. While most of us wouldn't voluntarily sign up for Severance, it's not hard to imagine a mega corporation like Lumon introducing something like this that they could market as a benefit for their employees. It's also the kind of thing that you would have to consider if it was offered to you. The idea sounds attractive before you think through what it would actually entail. Series creator Dan Erickson came up with the idea while working a series of temp jobs. He found himself fantasizing about a way to just skip over the next 8 hours of his life so that it would immediately be 5 p.m. and he'd be on his way home. He found it to be kind of scary, which sets up the sci-fi angle of introducing a new piece of technology that changes this relationship to work we all have some connection to. Of course, in the real world, corporations don't do anything that doesn't maximize profit for their shareholders. The trick is to make something as self-serving as Severance more palatable for the public. That seems to be consistent in the show, but in the world of Severance, where Lumon Industries is similar to a megacorp like Johnson & Johnson or something along those lines, you know, they make just about everything you can imagine. They also happen to be a dynastic outfit with a cult of personality situation built up around their founder, Kier Eagan. The key historical points we've been given are that Kier started Lumon in 1865. They initially specialized in topical salves, but have branched out into things like biotech, medical equipment, and pharmaceuticals on one end of the spectrum. And based on the Lumon branded products we see around the office and in the vending machine, just about anything else you could imagine. The office where Mark S. and the other MDRs work seems like it could be the company's global headquarters, but I don't think it's ever been confirmed. It's located in a town called Kier. Remember, even though this show plays like a mystery box wrapped up in a thriller, it's got sci-fi bones. In this version of the United States, the town of Kier is in the state or territory that uses the abbreviation PE. That isn't connected to anything that exists in our reality. That changed the idea that half of the city works for Lumon. Mark's living in a neighborhood that's subsidized by the company, and just a general company town feel from Kier's image on the license plates, his name on the local newspaper, and local restaurants being named after past CEOs all seem to back that up. I'm sure we'll learn more about how that all came to be in future seasons, but for now what's essential is that Lumon created the severance procedure. The severed floor we spent most of our time in during Season 1 is one of many. We know from the Lexington letter, the supplemental material the show put out to explain things a little further, that there's another MDR on a severed floor in Topeka. The process seems to be somewhat common and is controversial. Some groups have formed to protest it, such as the Whole Mind Collective, which we were first introduced to in episode 2. There are debates in Congress about it, and we know that Lumon has bought the influence of at least one state senator to fight for their interests. We also learned that just about everyone has an opinion on the procedure through a no-food dinner party that Mark's sister and her husband have with their friends in the series premiere. While they're not the brightest bunch, which is hilarious since their whole existence is predicated on the belief that they are, their concerns make sense. Plus, as horrifying as Severance is at work, we learn that they have bigger things in mind, hoping to expand the application outside their workplace. One example was the senator's wife giving birth while severed to essentially avoid the pain altogether. To say that we don't know Lumon's true intentions would be an understatement, let alone what the Eagan family itself is trying to do. We can say that it's probably not good for anyone other than the company or the family, and because they're so ingrained in people's lives, their influence is formidable. All of the Lumon CEOs have been Eagans. They all held the position until they died. The current CEO, James Eagan, is the 8th member of the family to occupy that position. There's quite a bit of quirkiness in the family, and one of Season 1's biggest twists was that refiner Helly R was the secret Eagan all along. She's not just a random cousin either. She's James Eagan's daughter, which as far as we can tell would make her the next in line to run things. Because of her father's advanced age, that should be important as things develop, but I'll use this familial connection to bring us back to the innies, since that's where I said I'd try to focus. In the beginning, the Helly character serves as the entry point into the world of severed employees. We learn about it as she experiences it. From the opening scene, we see that it involves an intense indoctrination process. She wakes up on the conference table alone rather than getting a warm greeting somewhere comfortable. The creators have said it's meant to be jarring and disorienting for the worker and to give them a sense that they've been born into this world. The first thing she hears is Mark's voice over the speaker, which is meant to feel like the company itself is talking to her. This extends to the way the office is put together. For the first few episodes, it's a bit confusing for viewers because the furniture and tech all have a strange retro look, making you wonder when the story takes place or if it's an alternate timeline situation. While it is that to a certain extent, the design choices are something Lumon does deliberately to separate the workers from their outie lives further. Since Helly rebels against all of this from the beginning, we get a pretty good idea of what they can do to your innie while you think they're happily plugging along earning you a paycheck. We learn about the code detectors, which sound made up but apparently do work to prevent the innie from passing messages to the outside world. After several attempts to circumvent this failsafe, which also helps viewers check off their list of ideas of how they might try to get a message out, she lands herself in the break room. This is the punishment innies fear most, even more than things like the bad soap and spicy candy, although the latter was related to a loyalty test rather than a punishment, and I like that line delivery so much I just wanted to include it here. The break room consists of a one-on-one session where the innie repeats something called the compunction statement. At the same time, their physiological responses are monitored. For reference, Helly did 1,072 rounds over 2 days on her first trip. The statement consists of them repeating this: "Forgive me for the harm I've caused this world. None may atone for my actions but me, and only in me shall their stain live on. I am thankful to have been caught, my fall cut short by those wizened hands. All I can be is sorry, and that is all I am." They repeat this over and over until the person administering the session is satisfied. This lines up with the indoctrination and disorientation and adds to the cult vibes. The employee is solely responsible and flawed. They need to submit to the wizened hands of their managers and more broadly the corporation, and in the case of Lumon, the perfect founder Kier. The break room is also something the outie would never be able to know that their other self was being put through. It's not the kind of thing that leaves a visible mark, and it's the kind of thing I don't think many people would voluntarily sign up for if they knew what was going on. This makes the outie Helena Eagan a lot more interesting to me. Out of all the refiners, her outie is the only one with inside knowledge about how Lumon keeps the innies under control. Helly R carries some part of her outie sense of privilege from growing up in a rich and powerful family with her on the severed floor. She's the kind of person who wants what she wants and expects to get it, leading to an escalation when her outie won't let her quit. This shows us what the Eagans think about innies. After Helly threatens to harm the body they share by cutting off her fingers with a paper cutter from the office, Helena tells her in a video message that she isn't a person and doesn't get to make the decisions about what happens to them. Her father echoes this when he talks about innies at the end, and you get the sense that they see them as disposable, hired help that can be easily replaced, holding them in lower regard than their other employees who you wouldn't imagine they think of very highly to begin with. Helena's harsh message leads Helly to an unsuccessful suicide attempt in the 4th episode. It hits hard because the innies are so precious, and Helly was the one that was us. We were primed to root for her right from the start, and when even that wasn't enough to end her time on the severed floor, it didn't break her completely. Instead, the bleed over of Helena's drive and conviction made Helly a catalyst for action once they learned about the overtime contingency, and Mark discovered he was carrying around the head of security's key card. At the end of the season, we learned that Helena had the process done for a PR campaign to promote Severance and make it seem harmless. This would help her family and the company she expects to run one day expand their patented process worldwide. However, their inability to completely neutralize the other version of her when the macrodats activate OTC themselves undermines this. Her innie wakes up during the family gala where they're promoting her severance journey and tells the world that everything they've been told about the process is a lie. The innies are being tortured and they're miserable down there. The season 1 finale was a cliffhanger across the board, and I'll touch on the different characters when we get to them, but the way Helly has become a liability for Helena makes her the hardest one to imagine returning to work. Based on her important role in the main story, I fully expect to see that happen, but they'll have to develop a compelling reason to send her back. I suppose it could be related to the budding romance with Mark S. that was heating up when they kissed before leaving to do the OTC, but I don't want to get into the weeds speculating since things could go in so many different directions. The main reason to expect Helly R to return is that if she didn't, it would be like killing the character off. Since innies only take over at work after the chip is activated, they cease to exist if that never happens. This is one of those philosophical conundrums Severance introduces and part of the dark side Helly's story highlights. If innies are unhappy working there, the obvious solution would be to quit, but that's an end for them that isn't that much different than what Helly tried to do with the extension cord in the elevator to get back at Helena. So the working situation is cruel, the innies never asked to be brought into it, and their only way out is non-existence. This is why a severed person might consider reintegration. This is where PDK came into the picture. He was the refiner Helly replaced. Mark was his good friend, and he was Mark's best friend. PD wasn't around for long, but introduced the idea of unifying the innie and outie memories and provided the connection to Ragabi, the mysterious former Lumon employee who says she's cracked the reintegration process. Considering the adverse complications PD experienced and presumably died from, and the fact that the Lumon board is adamant that it's not possible, her claims come off as somewhat dubious. At the same time, Peter Kilmer and PDK were reintegrated into the same mind before his life ended. Cobell was able to have that confirmed through the lab. From the phone PD left behind, Mark eventually meets up with this person who put the severance chip into his head, and Ragabi tells him that PD didn't die from the procedure. He died from not following her post-op instructions and running away at the first signs of sickness. She's the only person who's been able to pull reintegration off, and this has to be an essential part of the story going forward, since it would be hard to imagine it ending with all of the innies just ceasing to exist. If Helly was the Severed Floor Season 1 rebel, Irving B was her polar opposite. He's been working in MDR the longest and is a stickler for department procedures. He's incredibly knowledgeable about the history of the company and the employee handbook that he likes to quote in conversation. This is endlessly fun and also shows how limited the innie sources of information are. Irv's devotion borders on fanaticism, but then you think it's based on the only things he's ever read. Irv would be a model employee if he could stop dozing at his desk during work hours. When he falls asleep at his terminal, we see that he has a recurring dream involving black goo invading his cubicle. His napping on the clock gets him sent for a wellness session where a delightfully strange character named Miss Casey tells him facts about his outie in the most soothing way you could possibly imagine. We'll come back to her, but the key thing that happens here is that he meets Britt from O&D for the first time. An aspect of the indoctrination is to keep the departments separated. Part of the disorientation is that no one even knows how many departments there are, and it's rare to see anyone who's not a part of yours. If you think of the example of Helly, her co-workers and the few members of management she's encountered are the only people she's ever met. And when you think about it like that, it kind of makes sense, but keeping them separate also limits the possibility of inter-office relationships. This is where the magic of how the innies experience things really shines, because an immediate, unmistakable chemistry exists between Irv and Britt. It doesn't hurt that they're both played by incredible actors who also happen to be senior citizens who can sell the bonding they do over Kier Eagan's quotes better than possibly anyone else on the planet. But their innies are something like 3 and 7 years old respectively. Their blooming relationship gives us some of the best exchanges of dialogue imaginable, all laced with lore and world building that can almost slip by you. As you're being captivated by how odd but also pure and human they're getting to know each other is. It's one of the necessary bright spots in an otherwise fairly grim tale, and by encapsulating so much about what makes the show's formula great, it's one of the first season's highlights until it ends. Before we get into that, I have to address a character I've been able to dance around up until now. Seth Milchek is the supervisor on the Severed Floor who presents as being everything you'd want from someone holding that position. He's upbeat, friendly, and personable, appearing to have his employees' best interest at heart. It's in the corporate office setting kind of way, so it all feels a bit fake, but Trammell Tillman's performance is so good you tend to think that underneath it all, he's a good person who cares. He's also the guy who administers the break room sessions and is a company man first and foremost. By the end of the first season, we learn that the nice guy stuff may just be a front, and advancing at his job might be what he's really about. We see him tank the career of his boss, who we'll come back to in a bit, and he does so in a fairly calculated way. You might be able to make an argument that he did what he did because he really cares about the company, but that wouldn't exactly win the character any sympathy points. Overall, Milchek is an outlier. Amongst the innies, he's the only unsevered person. He appears to believe in Kier's vision, but also doesn't seem to have been brought up in it in the way Natalie or Cobell do. As a quick aside, there is one other character in this extended universe named Milchek that we know of. We see that name in the Lexington letter from an editor at the Topeka newspaper named Jim Milchek, who plays a part in burying the Severance whistleblower's story after she's killed in a car accident. There's no way to say if that will turn out to be important in the show, but that they gave him the same name seems like something I should mention. To get back to Irving Burt, MDR spends most of the season making things difficult for Milchek as they get increasingly curious about the world outside of their department following Helly's arrival. As Irv's attention starts to turn toward Burt, Seth initially tries to sow division by running what they refer to as a 266. This consists of accidentally printing out a painting on the MDR printer, which shows a violent dispute between the two departments that backs up an office myth. When that doesn't work, the two departments keep getting closer and start talking about teaming up to get answers about what they do there. When things heat up, MDR is disciplined, and then Irv learns Bert's innie is being retired. There's no way the innies could know for sure, but the timing certainly makes it seem like Lumon pushed him out. That gets Irv on board to help the others with their OTC plan. Before that happens, we see one scene of his outie at home and learn that he drinks coffee to stay up late and paints the same painting of a black hallway. The implication is that he's trying to get this image to bleed over to his innie. And Irv B falling asleep at work to have the recurring dream shows that it almost works. When he wakes up at home and we learn more about his outie, there are some startling differences. He's ex-military and appears to have been investigating or at the very least researching Lumon and the Severance program. It's hard to say precisely because we see his awakened innie explore the apartment alone, trying to put the pieces together himself. He sees the paintings of the dark hallway and a steamer trunk where he keeps his father's Navy uniform that has a hidden compartment filled with news articles about Lumon and internal documents, including a list of severed employees. Seeing Bert's name on the list and his address marked on a map convinces him to abandon the plan. He drives to his house where he sees him with his partner through their front window. The season ends with him knocking on their door just as his outie is about to wake up, as the OTC is deactivated. The revelation that Bert is with someone else in his outie life isn't a big surprise from the outside looking in. Of course, the outies have lives completely independent of the innies. That's the whole point. And on some level, Irv understands this. At the same time, that's not how the heart works. And as I mentioned earlier, we're talking about someone with 3 years of life experiences that all revolve around time spent working in a cubicle. There's no question he'll be devastated when he returns there. What's more intriguing is the image he obsessively paints. There's a question about how his outie would have seen that elevator, but I think we can safely speculate about this without getting into any tinfoil. The show created fake LinkedIn profiles for the characters, and the one for Irv says he's been at Lumon for 9 years. We know he's been working as a severed employee in MDR for 3 of those. So the simplest explanation is that he worked on the severed floor before having the procedure in a role similar to Milchek's. One clue to back this up is that when we see Miss Casey approach the elevator in the dark hallway, we notice that she can't see the red arrow. She even asks Seth if her outie is happy up there when we know that she's being sent down to the testing floor. The down arrow doesn't appear until the doors close, so you can never see it unless you watch someone go down. Based on his ongoing interest and cache of documents, it's possible he saw something while working there that put him on this crusade. And to further that, he went undercover as a severed person. The Macrodats learned about the overtime contingency because of their first visit to the back room in O&D. While they were there, Dylan G pocketed an ideographic card that they had printed, which forced Milchick to wake him up at home to find out where he put it. While he was awake, Dylan accidentally saw one of his 3 kids. I know we should try to enjoy all the refiners equally, and the characters and performances are all amazing in their own way, but I'm just going to come out and say that Dylan G is my favorite. Zach Cherry's performance is a big part of it, but it also goes back to what I said about Irv and Bert's courtship. This is a pretty dark story. The parts that take place on the outside, where the lead is wholly tortured in a different way, could really skew things in that direction, since the innies are essentially trapped. As thought-provoking as it all is, it still manages to be one of the funniest dramatic shows out there, and Dylan delivers so many of the best lines. Unfortunately, since he stayed behind to activate the OTC, there isn't as much to say about him as the others. His innie is an achiever who's been named Refiner of the Quarter multiple times. Another one of those details that leans into the innie's limited experience is how he's really proud of the perks and tier incentives he's earned for his accomplishments. If Irv was a beacon of conformity and procedure, which makes sense because of his outie's military background, Dylan is all about the work, and without a better word to describe it, tribalism. Let's just say he's protective of MDR and very suspicious of other departments. The only thing we know about his outie is that he appears to be a family man. Finding out he had a son set innie Dylan on a destructive path that culminated in him biting Milchick and bringing Helly's music dance experience to an end. Before he activated the OTC, Dylan was also our window into the Waffle Party. This is the top reward given to the Refiner of the Quarter. Although it had been mentioned several times during the season, it was still a complete surprise when we learned what it actually was. After a delicious looking plate of waffles, the empty plate encourages the Refiner to go to the Founder's bed. There they put on a mask that looks like Kier and indulge in a sexual experience with 4 strangers who are also masked and dressed up as the 4 Tempers. Dylan skips out before the actual sex gets going, but the Waffle Party seems to unlock a whole different level of Eagan family strangeness. The 4 Tempers, introduced early in a painting outside of wellness, are part of Kier's philosophy. He believes every human soul possesses some quantity of the 4 Tempers, which he defines as woe, frolic, dread, and malice. These also show up in the employee handbook in relation to the numbers the refiners see on their screens. You can also see the abbreviations on the bins to make it appear as if they're balancing the Tempers as Kier would want them to. Earlier, I mentioned that they started collaborating with O&D to try to figure out what they do. I meant that literally because they really have no idea what their job is. This big mystery fuels a lot of speculation surrounding the show, and it's been around so long now that the theories just keep getting crazier. I won't spend a lot of time on it because it'll probably be answered and turn out to be fairly simple, but I will say that the basic clues tell us they are balancing Tempers in air quotes, and we know there is a testing floor in the building where they are presumably testing things. I imagine these two things might turn out to be connected, and the only thin evidence I have is that Mark S. has that laser-etched crystal head on his desk that we found out he got after finishing a file in one day. They usually take multiple weeks, and we know his wife, who his outie believes is dead, is alive in some capacity on the testing floor, which may have given him some unique insight into that file. The work is mysterious and important. Mark is the final Macrodat we need to discuss, and the questions surrounding his wife are positioned to be the catalyst for everything that happens after the first season. Losing her in a car accident puts Mark on his path to becoming severed. He's depressed, drinks way too much, and honestly thinks switching his brain off for 8 hours a day could be helpful. He goes as far as saying being severed is helping him multiple times, but this feels more like a situation where he's trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. When you initially consider severance as a solution and the motivations for people who would sign up for it, the first things that come to mind are people who are unemployed and just need a job, low-wage earners who could get a significant bump, something like what you see with Peggy K in the Lexington letter, and people who find themselves doing mindlessly repetitive tasks all day. In those cases, the exploitation isn't any less disturbing, but you can understand a person needing to survive. Mark's case is particularly haunting since you know he's chasing something the technology can't provide. Still, his desperation makes it so he can only imagine something like that, something external that doesn't come from him working. Before Lumon, he was a World War I history professor. His wife Gemma taught Russian literature, and it's implied they likely met when they were both working at Gans College. We don't get many details beyond that, other than knowing this is part of why it's hard for him to return to work after she died. And it's notable that when he first meets Ragabi, she's hiding out in a part of the college that seems abandoned. The only person outie Mark seems to be close with is his sister Devin. She's concerned about his well-being and isn't convinced that working on the severed floor is helping. She wants him to see a professional and points out that forgetting about Gemma for 8 hours a day isn't the same as healing. She's expecting her first child with her husband Rickon, who, as I've already hinted, is a bit much, although in the most entertaining ways. Sometimes you wonder how he landed Devin, but they do seem to fit together well in their own way. He's a writer, and leaving his latest book as a gift on Mark's porch sets off a series of events inside Lumon after Miss Cobell takes it in to have Milchek check it for messages. This draws on everything I've been saying is so excellent about the innies when they get a hold of it. It's the first book they've ever read, it's about identity, and it blows their minds, which it should. I said earlier that the question the show explores is, who are you? And then who would you be if your experiences were stripped away and all of that? The exploration continues because this process doesn't just create a different version of you. Regardless of what Helena told Helly, it makes a person, someone who has their own experiences and needs to try to figure out who they are. So the title is fitting. The You Are. The excerpts we get from it are hilarious, and we can see how they would grab a hold of those. And the whole situation culminates in one of the series' best moments. Dylan G, the canonically best refiner, finishes one of the passages Mark is reciting and declares, page 197 slaps. Then they get ready to implement their plan to wake up outside. Miss Cobell keeps coming up, and after Gemma, she's the character with the most compelling mystery surrounding her. While she's not severed, she does live two separate lives as Mark's boss, the manager of the severed floor on the inside, and his neighbor who goes by the name Mrs. Selvig and claims to run the shop in town called Swab Girl that sells soaps and bath bombs among other things. Her shop's name references Kier's wife Imogene, which we learned about through a painting Irving and Britt looked at together. Cobell touches on the relationship we non-severed have with our work selves. She's a weird, turned up to 11 example of how we all present ourselves as different people at work. She's also a true believer in Kier and his wisdom, and seeing her basement shrine for the first time adds a whole other layer. If you've never seen it, I highly recommend looking up the feature on Set Decor with the show's set director Andrew Baseman for a close-up look at some of this stuff. From the shrine, we learn that Harmony attended the Myrtle Eagan School for Girls, where she won the Most Observant and Best Use of Mealtime Condiments awards. We also learn that her mother's name is Charlotte Cobell from a medical bracelet she displays alongside a hospital feeding or breathing tube on the shelf. She has an elaborate shrine with Kier and Lumon memorabilia. She's also recreated her bedroom from the School for Girls, with a needlepoint of the 9 principles hanging above it, and some creepy looking dolls of herself and Kier that sit on top of the bed. She has a heightened interest in Mark that seems to go beyond his departments making their quota. Or maybe it's all connected, because who can say when you don't know what they're actually doing when they hit that. As an employee, her loyalty to the idea of Kier seems to transcend her devotion to the actual corporation. She has a particularly tense relationship with Natalie, who works as a liaison with the board. She became fixated on reintegration after PD left in a way that seemed personal. This, which only seems to be rivaled by her interest in Mark and Gemma, played a part in her doing things without the board's consent and ultimately led to her being fired when Milchek sent them the photos of Helly's suicide attempt, which Harmony covered up. Her interest in Mark and Gemma is hard to parse. We know she knows the whole story of who they are, and we even see her take a candle that belonged to Gemma out of storage in Mark's basement. She gives that to Miss Casey for a special wellness session, where she burns it while innie Mark sculpts the tree where Gemma Gemma had her car crash, something he really shouldn't know about. Cobell seems to want them to recognize each other, but we don't necessarily know why. This also makes her choice to retire Ms. Casey somewhat confusing. The obsession extends to the outside, where she tries to get close to Devin through pretending to be a lactation consultant. This positions her at Rickon's place when Mark wakes up, and by realizing what was happening when he called her by her work name, Harmony's able to alert Milchek and race over to the gala. In her white Volkswagen Rabbit, that I'll just mention here because I couldn't find a different place to slip that detail in. Her actions will probably help to get her back on the good side of the board, but it still isn't likely they'll be ready to see her proof related to Petey's reintegration because they need that to be impossible. Well, we spend most of our time focused on Mark, who becomes a compelling character through a fantastic split performance from Adam Scott. His arc is pretty straightforward. From their distinct perspectives, both his innie and outie start questioning what Lumon's up to. He's unreceptive to the idea of reintegration when he first meets Petey, and his adverse side effects and eventual death don't really help the situation. There are several small pushes that should make him more sympathetic to his innie situation, but in the end, finding out Gemma is there will probably be the thing that gets him to commit. I tried to avoid getting into too many of the finer details because it's a bit overwhelming for a video like this, but there's been a lot said about the colors in Severance. The red and blue for outside and inside, something we see reflected in Mark's blue and red fish that are in the same tank but divided and separated, and the loose reference that's there to the red pill and blue pill from the Matrix. One detail I really enjoyed slightly more than the others was the robe Mark gave to reintegrated Petey, which I'll add he got from Rickon, has both red and blue stripes. It's not like it changes the story. Introducing Petey in any robe would still make reintegration feel likely for Mark's next step, but we're almost finished, so I might as well indulge. His season ends with his outie seeing his wedding photo and realizing he was married to Ms. Casey. He runs out to try to share this news, shouting that she's alive, but the OTC ends and his outie takes over before he can explain who he's talking about. The finale is one of the best hours of TV ever put together that owes a lot of its success to the intentional pacing and smart character development that fueled its tension. The comedy, romance, and endless string of compelling mysteries have set the table for whatever comes next. Gemma/Miss Casey is one of those mysteries where you are probably better off sitting back and just waiting to see what happens. I understand the impulse to want to solve a mystery box type show. I made a video about it myself at the end of last season. But it's really hard to tell what's going on with the testing floor and how this person who means so much to one of our refiners who also believes she's dead has ended up there, at least with the clues we have right now. For me, the macrodats are enough. Oh yeah, and there were some baby goats. That's a thing that Helly and Mark discovered when they were walking around. It sure to fit in somewhere, but for as much as people bring that up in relation to the show, and as fun as it is to think about it, I don't think I've ever heard a theory about them that seemed like it might be right. I think that's everything you need to remember about Season 1, and I think that's a great place to leave things. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I'll be doing weekly recaps of Season 2 as those episodes come out. So thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.